Welcome back to the Self-Esteem and Confidence Mindset podcast with me, Johnny Pardo. And today I welcome Jose Morillo to the show. And I'm excited to dive into his book and talk about this concept of FIDO that he's going to expand on this acronym for us. So just a quick introduction to Jose. So Jose is a former physical therapist who went on to eventually become the chief executive officer of 2 hospitals in Southwest Florida. After growing wary of the corporate world, he jumped into entrepreneurship and is currently operating 3 dog daycare and boarding facilities in Houston, Texas area. He recently fulfilled one of his many goals by writing his first book, FIDO, Forget It, Drive On, a book that tells of his life's mantra thanks to all the teachings of his military father. So welcome to the show today, Jose. Glad to have you on.
I appreciate you inviting me. Thank you very much.
You and I'm really curious about your book and learning from you today. Yeah, I'd love to hear about how this phrase FIDO came about, and like more about that. Where did it came from your father?
Well, it started with my father, a military guy. And, just to kind of go back a little bit in time, my father from Puerto Rico, and he joined the United States Army and went into in the military, really not knowing the English language. So all he could speak was a very broken English. And the only reason I mention that is because that's going to come back in a little bit. Ever since I was a young kid, all I ever wanted to do was to be a doctor. That's all I was focused on, being a medical doctor. As much as I can remember, I would absorb books on biology, anything biology related. I wanted to know about it. So I was focused on that, and I went through high school, got into university with the sole purpose of trying to get into medical school. So I did my bachelor's degree in biology. And after I finished those 4 degrees, I applied to a medical school where I was living at the time in Puerto Rico. Now, in hindsight, I probably should have applied to more than just one school, but I applied to one because my mom and dad, my mom wasn't doing well physically, so I thought I'd stick around the house just to help out as best I can. So I applied to the medical school, and I didn't get accepted. And for me, at that point, I am about 22 years old. I'm 63 years old now, but about 22 years old, it hit me hard. That was my first dealing with what I, at the time, perceived to be failure. I felt like I failed miserably. And for about 2 weeks, I was just moping around the house, just depressed, really not knowing what to do with myself, because I learned very quickly that there's not a whole heck of a lot you can do with a bachelor's degree in biology. So I didn't know what I was going to do. And I think, in hindsight, I do believe that I was probably moping for I said I was moping for 2 weeks, but I was probably moping for about a week and 6 days longer than my dad would have liked. Because at one point, my dad walks into my room, right about the 2-week mark, and in his broken English, he says to me, and he just reverted back to his old sergeant. He was a sergeant in the military, and I think he turned into a drill instructor that day. And he said to me, in Spanish, he said a phrase that we've got to move on. But then he gets in his military stance, looks at me and says, "Forget it, drive on." Now, Johnny, I'm not going to lie to you. He's a military guy. The word actually wasn't forget. It was something else. But I'm not going to, I decided to soften it up a little bit in my book. But he says to me, "Forget it, drive on." And that term, from that moment on, all the way through my entire life and through many, many examples. And in my book, I try to write about these many examples. It just kept being reinforced where, when we get hit with things in many, many ways that life hits us, you've got to come to a point where you have to forget it and drive on. So that mantra just became a big deal for me. And I actually created a little rubber bracelet that I've worn for years around my wrist just to remind myself, you know what, when things are tough, it's time to FIDO. You got to forget it. You got to drive on.
I love that. Having a wristband to that and then writing a whole book on it. So what inspired you to write a whole book about it?
Well, first of all, I always wanted to write a book. And because this particular mantra was just so meaningful to me, and it helped me out in so many ways. And then when you get in positions like I've been throughout healthcare, various leadership positions, eventually becoming a CEO of a hospital, of a couple of hospitals actually, you see people going through struggles, you see people going through different things, and then you want to reach out to them. You want to just be able to, I don't know, reach out to them, put your arm around them and say, hey, it's going to be okay. You just have to FIDO. And a lot of people that know me, not only through my career, my different careers, but even now, they know that that's a term that I use all the time when they're running into trouble. And it's not that I'm trying to be, not show any empathy. It's just that, after showing empathy and after listening to somebody, you got to tell them, it's time to forget it and drive on. It's time to go on to the next project, the next thing. Because life has a way of, whenever you get things thrown at you like that could be that are seemingly difficult at that moment in time, it's probably just a way of life telling you that, hey, that's not, that you need to just take a different direction. Because that doesn't mean it's the end of your goal. It's just that you need to take a different approach. That's all it is. And which is why you have to forget it and drive on. You have to FIDO.
I love that. And I imagine being a chief executive officer of a hospital, that comes with quite a lot of pressures and stresses. So was it a particularly useful phrase to live by in those circumstances?
My gosh, yes, it was. And it's a lot because, and as you allude to, there's a lot going on in hospitals, not just the pressures of, healthcare, of taking care of patients that need your care. But you've got, as a CEO position, you've got the pressures of a board that you have to respond to. You've got the pressures of doctors that are working with you that are expecting certain things. You've got, over 300 plus employees at my different hospitals that you're responsible for. So from a personal standpoint, when I'm going through what some might consider just a battle every single day, I had to remind myself, time to FIDO, because if you get too worked up emotionally with some of the goings on that can happen on any given day, it can mess you up mentally. It really can. So you have to take that approach. You have to forget it and drive on.
And what about when things are really building up for you? Is there some kind of way you find useful to kind of release that when all the stresses kind of come up? Because it sounds really, really useful for using in the moment and kind of just moving on with things. When things are sort of piling up, do you use a similar approach?
I do, and there's something I mention in the book. And I was taught this many years back. I remember during a course I was taking for physical therapy, continuing education courses, and it served me well, and I do it to this day, and it certainly served me well during that period of time. You have to step away. You have to step away from the situation that you're in. And what do I mean by step away? You have to go to a quiet room. It could be as simple as that. Or maybe it's time to go take a weekend, just a little weekend break so that you can think. But while you're doing that, you have to go, and I go through this exercise, and I talk about it in the book. You go through every single one of your senses. So wherever I'm at, let's say I decide I'm going to go to a lake house, and because I've got to get away from this situation so that I can think right. Well, while I'm at that lake house, I'm going to think about all my senses. What am I seeing right now? What am I hearing right now? What am I tasting right now? What am I feeling? I'm going through all my senses. And the reason I'm doing that is because it puts me into right now mode. Because most of the time, whenever we go kind of crazy in terms of, what am I going to do next? What am I going to do? It's because I'm thinking about the things from yesterday, or I'm thinking about the things I need to do tomorrow, when what I need to be is put myself in the right now. And that exercise of going through all my senses forces me in the right now. And I find that my mind clears up, and now I can come up with better decisions, so it's just a great exercise, and it works well for me.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, it sounds quite a mindful sort of practice.
Yes, absolutely. You have to recognize your environment, have to be very aware of where you are at any given moment in time so that you can make proper decisions. There's one of the chapters I talk about this, one of my favorite movies that I've ever watched. And there's a personal reason for it, is because my father actually participated in the very battle depicted in this movie. And the movie's We Were Soldiers. By the main character in the movie was Mel Gibson, and he played the role of Colonel Hal Moore. Well, Colonel Hal Moore was a believer in that any situation that I am in right now is caused by me. I created that situation. So, and if I accept responsibility for creating that situation, the beautiful thing is what happens is that means if I created it, I can get out of it. Now, I may not have the answer right now, But the answers are there. We just have to stop and think, and put ourselves in the right now in order to figure out. And there's a scene in that movie that depicts that clearly, where, Colonel Halmore and his troops in Vietnam are getting overrun, and he's being hammered by all of his lieutenants. We got a problem here, we got a problem there, a problem going on somewhere else. And he just stops. He steps away completely from the situation. He looks around, and then he comes back, and then he gives the orders to the commanders as to what to do next. And that is, I think, a perfect example of how whenever you're getting hammered like that, you've got to step away. You got to take a breather. You got to realize what's going on in your body, what's going on around you, and step away, and then come back, because you'll make better decisions when you do that.
Stepping out of maybe the chaos or the kind of the constant going ons, and then sort of observing and thinking a bit more clearly, it sounds like. And it sounds like there's lots of different techniques in the book and different methods.
Absolutely. And just recognizing what truly is important in your life. You've got to answer that decision. And I think too many people answer that decision based on monetary value, or base it on stature in a job, or wherever it may be. And I believe when you do that, and you lose those things, because those things are fleeting, then all of a sudden you find yourself in a situation where you feel you have no value. And there's nothing farther from the truth. If you truly understand what is it that is important to you, you have to understand what's important. People ask me all the time, what's success mean to you? To be honest with you, Johnny, to me, success is being around a campfire with friends I enjoy being with, having a beer, and just enjoying myself. Whenever that's happening, I feel successful. And you know what? I can create that moment anytime I want, that moment of success. So I try not to put those things on, whether it's money, whether it's positions, because I feel relationships are just so much more important than any of that.
And defining your own success, I love it.
You got to define it clearly, and you got to define it in terms that really mean something. Because money and positions, all those things can go away. They can go away.
Absolutely. I'd like to ask you a little bit. You went from chief executive officer to an entrepreneur. So there's a bit of a transition there. How did you find FIDO was useful with being an entrepreneur?
Well, there it becomes even more so. I left the corporate world because, I think a lot of entrepreneurs will tell you the same thing. When you're in the corporate world, although I have the title of chief executive officer, truly I'm more of a glorified manager, because there's still bosses above me that are telling me what I have to do from far away. I had hospitals in Florida, and our corporate headquarters were in Tennessee, and you'd have bosses telling you exactly what you need to do. So there was some frustration with that. After 10 years, I decided, I'm going to go out and try it on my own. Now, when you go out and try it on your own, a whole new set of challenges come your way, because, now you've got to come to terms with the fact that you are the master of your own destiny. If I don't wake up this morning hungry to get out there, guess what? I'm not going to make any money. So I've got to hustle. But with that hustle, I also have to be cognizant of the fact that I've got employees that are working for me and with me that also have goals and also have missions. So this all of a sudden the FIDO concept just becomes a whole different thing, because now, not only is it personal for me, but it's, I've got people around me that need to hear these concepts so that they can move forward towards the goals that my company's set. It's been a fascinating ride, has been. I've been doing this now for 10 years, and it has been a fascinating ride being an entrepreneur.
Yeah, it sounds like FIDO is like a very useful thing for you, because there's probably quite a whole set of challenges and things to, like rejections and kind of blockages and setbacks and things like that you have to deal with as an entrepreneur, right?
Without a doubt. I'm now in the dog care business. I mean, we do dog boarding and daycare. And what to give you a good example, things happen in our buildings. Things can happen. Air conditioning system breaks down, and now I've got to figure out the money to pay for that system. Well, I've got to put myself in a mentality of, I can worry about that all day long, or I can forget it and drive on. And by drive on means I figure out a way to come up with the money to get that air conditioning system fixed, because I've got employees that need jobs, and I got to make it proper for them. So yeah, it absolutely becomes a whole new level of whole new level of FIDO involved there.
A whole new level there. Oh wow. Yeah, so I know you learned like FIDO from your father in the military. Was there any other like key lessons from your father that you learned that been important in your life?
You know, like yes, and this one actually involves my mother and my father, and I talk about this in a chapter in the book. It's a story of my life that I've just never forgotten. When we lived in Germany for about 3 years back in the early 70s, and during my father's military stint, towards the end of it, he got stationed to his home back in Puerto Rico. So he gets to go home to Puerto Rico. Well, in the meantime, he has to get his car to the northern part of Germany, to Bremerhaven, in order to get the car shipped back to Puerto Rico. Now, I got to tell you a little bit about this car. It was an old station wagon, LTD Country Squire, the kind with the wood paneling. If you think of 70s, you've probably seen this this vehicle somewhere, because it's classic 70s vehicle, you know. And my dad, that was his pride and joy. Oh my gosh, he'd have us clean that car all the time. Every weekend it was cleaning that car, taking care of it. Well, when he gets told that it's time to ship that car out, he takes the long drive from where we were stationed in Germany, headed to Bremerhaven, and on the way up there, he totals the car, gets in a car accident, and completely totals the car. Now, when he gets back, he comes home, he's crying. My mom is crying. Us children, we were crying too. We were like, oh my gosh, we lost this station wagon. And we're crying over a station wagon. Now, a couple of days later, my dad, at the time, the military bases have to do a spring cleanup. So my dad was brought back to the base in order to help out with the cleanup. And he was assigned to cutting the lawn. And while he's pushing the lawnmower, he slips under the lawnmower and it severs 3 of his toes. And then now we got to run it. We're only like a week away from heading back to Puerto Rico. He's got to be in a hospital, get surgery, get all this done. And then we're getting on a plane to go back to Puerto Rico. And I remember my mom saying something that stuck with me. She says, here we were crying over this vehicle just a couple of days ago. We never once bothered to ask, my dad whether, was he okay? There was a total loss of the vehicle. Was he okay? Was everything okay? And a couple of days later, he severs his foot. And it was just a lesson that stuck with me for whatever reason. It just stuck with me that, material things, we can't latch on to those things like that. We just can't do that. They're fun to have. Don't get me wrong. It's nice to reach out to have goals and to get yourself a nice car or whatever it is you want to do. But you can't latch onto yourself emotionally to those things like that, because the more important things, the relationship, in this case, the relationship with my father, that was the most important thing. And we could have lost him. And then what? That would have been the worst thing on earth, right? We were blessed that it didn't happen. And it was just a lesson that stuck hard with me, that we have to put importance to the things that really are important, not to material things. It's just not important. Those things aren't important. They're nice to have, but they're not important.
Wow, no, that's an important lesson. Was there kind of, like, being in the military, was there a kind of way of how he approached life that you took from your father?
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, the fact that we moved around every 3 years. So, whenever I was born in Puerto Rico, but whenever people ask me, where are you from? I say I'm from everywhere pretty much, because every 3 years we moved to a different spot, But I think it taught me a lot. It gave me perspective, and same perspective that my dad would always instill on us, that there are, we have people all over the world, and we can't isolate ourselves into thinking, we are the only ones in our area, whether I'm living in the United States or whether you're living in the UK. There are people all around us, and we all have our set of problems. And like I talk in one of my books, interestingly enough, there's great people all over the world, in wherever they may be, in the UK, in Texas, great people. But there's also not so great people. That's just part of the human experience. It is what it is. And so my dad always would tell us that. He says, hey, people are just people. You just got to go out and meet them and know who they are. But understand. And I do talk a little bit in my book about some experiences. There's one chapter in my book that I call "You Can't Fix Stupid." Because at the end of the day, there are stupid people wherever you may go. And you just have to learn to deal with those people, and you have to fight out. Forget it, drive on.
Not trying to get attached to, is that about not trying to get attached to like what someone says or does and taking that personally?
Exactly. The example I'll give you, which I talk about in the book, is I just finished the University of Puerto Rico. I became a physical therapist after, the whole debacle with medical school. And I got recruited to work in the state of Texas I was going to be the director of the department there in a small town hospital. And I remember the CEO, he introduces me to everyone at the nurses station. And this is the way he introduced me. He said, I want you to meet Jose. He's from Puerto Rico, but he's a different kind of Puerto Rican. Now, at that age, I remember immediately thinking, what on earth does he mean by that? What kind of comment is that? He's a different kind of Puerto Rican. And, some might attribute that to discrimination, all kinds of things. I learned early on to attribute it to, sometimes people are just stupid, and you have to forgive them for that, because we're all going to go through, say stupid things. We're all going to say, make mistakes or whatever. You just have to forgive them for that, and you got to move on. I can't take that personally. At the time, I wanted to take it very personally, but I just said to myself, Nah, I'm moving on. Forget that, and I let it at that. But that's just one example of many that I've had in my life. People you run into and just and immediately, this might not be somebody I want to hang out with. But then there are those many that you absolutely know right from the get-go. Yeah, this is somebody I want to emulate. This is somebody I want to be a part of. That's just people. People are wonderful all over the world, just like there are bad people all over the world. We're all just going through a human condition.
I like that. I know the listener listening to this podcast, there's often I get feedback that people get really impacted by other people's actions, and I think that's some really good guidance on there, and it sounds like you touched on that in the book, so that's awesome. I love that.
Yeah, I do mention that. That's one important chapter in the book, and it's been my experience not to I try not to engage with crazy stuff. Whenever somebody says something that's just outlandish, I'm not gonna engage. I don't want to spend that kind of energy. I'd prefer to spend it with people like you. I'm talking with you right now, and I'm having a great time. I prefer to engage with people like that. And that's just a philosophy that I've taken, because that forget it, drive on mentality just makes it important for me to, I gotta move on. I gotta move on to the people that make me a better person.
I like that. Taking the energy elsewhere and directing.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Absolutely.
So you've obviously got this, FIDO has been a big saying. Do you have any other sort of like mantras that you collect or you say to yourself?
I do, and what a great question. There's one in Spanish, and I mention it in the book, and I'll say it in Spanish and then I'll translate it because it's powerful to me. If you were born to eventually die, then what's holding you back? And when you think about that, it's a common phrase in Hispanic culture. When if you were born to eventually die, then what's holding you back? That to me, that's very freeing. It's what freedom that comes from a statement like that. Because what's the worst that can happen if I make this move, whatever move it may be that's scaring me? And I talk about fear in the book as well. If it's scaring me so much, I just got to think, so what if I fail? What's the big deal? I only live. You only have one shot at this life, man. So let's make the best of it, and let's not walk around fearful of the decisions we make. So remember that one. Si naciste para morir, ¿por qué te aguantas?
It's very powerful how you said it. I'm not sure I could duplicate that. The Spanish, you can feel the energy of something, even if you don't understand it. I can feel there's a real strong energy behind that for you.
I appreciate it. That's interesting you mentioned that, because I do tell a lot of people that something about the Spanish language, it seems a lot more passionate. And I love both languages. I'm fluent in both languages, but Spanish is just a lot more passionate.
So that's a key sort of like mantra that you mentioned. So you mentioned a few sort of mantras in the book.
Yes. Here's a great one. And this is I believe it was the Roman philosopher Seneca, who said, "He who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than necessary." And I got to remind myself of that all the time. I am a classic worrier. I worry too much. And you know what? When I do that, I'm basically suffering more than necessary, because when the eventual situation happens and none of what I worried about came to fruition, I think back, Why did I worry so much? Well, yeah, because, he who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than necessary. Nothing true. That was back from the Roman philosophers, and it's still true today.
I like that. Powerful. Yeah, words can be really, really powerful. Yeah. You mentioned you got fear in the book. You talk about fear in the book, and helping people move through that. Is that like a particular chapter you mentioned on that? Because I know I really resonated with what you said about if you're born to die, what's holding you back?
Right.
Do you offer other kind of like tips to people in the book about moving through fear?
Yeah, the thing about fear, and one of the authors that I read constantly, and one of the authors that kind of put me on this path back in the early 90s was the great Anthony Robbins. Everybody knows him, the motivational speaker. But he says something, about the fact that, the things we fear, we can get past fear by just simply acting. Now, what exactly does that mean? Well, an example that I give in my book, like I think many, have a fear of public speaking. Now, I eventually became a CEO where that was almost a grand requirement. I mean, it was just constant, whether it's in front of 300 employees or whether in front of a board. I mean, it's just constant. So I had to come to terms with the fact if I wanted to become a CEO, I needed to get over that fear somehow. And I figured that, it's all about just taking small action. Take a little bit of action here, today, tomorrow, right now, whatever that action may be. It could be as simple as, okay, I'm going to pick up a book on public speaking. That could be my first action. But then the next action could be, you know what? I'm going to force myself into a situation for public speaking. Local networking, like in the case right now, business networking international that I work with. I force myself to have to speak in front of a group. And if I have that mentality in my mind that, if I was born to eventually die, then what's holding me back? Then I'm not going to let that hold me back. I'm not that fear. I'm just going to move through that fear and that little bit of action, because it's just like practice. That's all it is. It's just like you're practicing to play tennis, like you're practicing to play any sport. The more you practice it, the less that fear becomes. And it's funny because, I've gotten to a point now where people will say, you actually had fear of public speaking? And I tell them to this day, I would just as soon be in front of my television watching World Wrestling Entertainment than to be in front of a crowd speaking. However, I've gotten past that. And when I get up there, I just think, you know what? I'm just practicing. I got to keep practicing. And I just go ahead and do it. Just got to get into a mentality of, I'm not going to let something hold me back, because this life is too short. I can't hold. And it served me well, that mentality, because I eventually, like I said, became a CEO of hospitals, and now I'm an entrepreneur, and it served me well, because you just got to look at it as practice.
Practice. Yeah. I like the combination of what you've shared for fear of, you being born to die, and, why not do all you can and then taking action and moving through that as well. Sounds like the book's got some really, well, I know it's got some really powerful lessons expanding on like FIDO, what you've learned, and there's a ton of value in that book. I'd love to know, Jose, as we sort of finish today, if there's maybe a FIDO point you want to share with us, and where can the listener find the book or find out more about your work on the book if they want to reach it?
Well, you can get the book on Amazon, Amazon.com, BarnesandNobles.com. It's also available on Audible. Either one of those formats, you can pick up the book. And in terms of something to think about, lasting thoughts, I'm trying not to mess up for anybody who wants to buy the book, but I think back on a story of back when I was in my CEO days. I was in my office, and I remember going off in a rampage about something. I don't know what it was. I was upset. And my boss at the time, a gentleman by the name of Ricky Setcher, he was just sitting there, just looking at me. And I am just angry about just going off. I forgot what the topic was even about. But after I finished, he looks at me, and very calmly says to me, Jose, I just got one question I want to ask you. And I'm like, what's that? Is this the hill you want to die on? And I looked at him, I kind of smiled, and I said, you know what, Ricky? No, and thank you. I needed that. And he reminded me yet again, through many cases in my life, that sometimes you just got to forget it and drive on. Because if it's not going to be important 5 years from now, then why am I putting so much energy into it now? So FIDO FIDO's important.
FIDO, everyone. So, Jose, I want to thank you for everything you've shared and the value you've given today, for what you're doing with the book. I appreciate you for coming on today.
I appreciate you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So that concludes our episode for today. And remember to lead with your heart and not with fear.